We begin with the shocking revelations from former Defense Secretary Robert Gates in his book this morning about his time in the Obama White House. We've been reporting on this morning, how in this astounding book, the former Defense Secretary writes about the, quote, poisonous atmosphere in which he says he felt like a complete outsider. And this is the Secretary of Defense. Hello, everyone, and welcome to America's News Headquarters on this Sunday morning. I'm Eric Shaw.
Yeah, a lot of people are taking a closer look at the book and some of the allegations, and we are no exception. I'm Jamie Colby, and it's great to have you here. A lot of the new details that are emerging from this newly released excerpt from Gates' new memoir, Duty. Well, in it, Gates does go into pretty full detail about his frustration with certain members of the Obama administration. He claims that they slammed former President George Bush and disrespected military leaders. Our Elizabeth Pran is live in Washington with more details on what's just been released. Elizabeth, good morning.
You're right. Good morning. Good morning to both of you. Former Defense Secretary Robert Gates sitting down for his first interview since excerpts of his memoir made headlines, painting President Obama as insecure and dubious of top leaders of the armed forces. Gates also acknowledged his conflicts with Vice President Joe Biden at points in his book. He writes, quote, he has been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades. During the interview, Secretary Gates only recalls one instance where the two saw eye to eye. Looking back, he also acknowledged the time he felt concerned when then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made a troop surge decision due to what he thought was political motivation. Gates comparing the two presidents he worked for, President George Bush and President Obama. He said it was Obama who was missing conviction in his orders during the war in Afghanistan.
It's one thing to tell the troops that you support them. It's another to work at making them believe that you believe, as president, that their sacrifice is worth it, that the cause is just, that what they are doing is important for the country, and that they must succeed. President Bush did that with the troops when I was secretary. I did not see President Obama do that.
Now, the Obama administration mostly on the defensive after allegations emerged that the administration spokesman said it didn't find it unusual that there were debates about the policy in Afghanistan.
And he is extremely conscious of the responsibility that that authority bestows upon him and those who hold his office. And therefore, he would not make decisions about surging U.S. troops without a thorough debate.
That being said, Gates says his perspective, working for 8 presidents and being secretary for 4.5 years, that he wrote the novel in a fair and comprehensive way. He also says he has no regrets. Jamie, Eric, back to you.
Elizabeth Pran live in Washington. Elizabeth, thank you. Eric, to you now.
So, Jamie, what insight can we actually glean into the way the White House, Congress, and the Pentagon really work from Gates' stunning revelations and how power is actually used at the highest levels of our government? Well, someone who has been there joins us now, as always, Ambassador John Bolton, Fox News contributor, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. The ambassador is in Taiwan this morning. Ambassador, it's pretty astonishing, some of these revelations. Mr. Gates writes, quote, the president doesn't trust his commander, can't stand Karzai, doesn't believe his own strategy, doesn't consider the war to be his. For him, it's all about getting out. This while the troops are in harm's way. What does all this mean?
Well, I think it's an indictment of Barack Obama. I think it shows that he doesn't really understand the fundamentals of national security decision-making, and that the predominance of politics in his decision demonstrates, as you just heard Secretary Gates say, that President Obama just doesn't consider national security that important. Now, that sometimes people say, but how can that be? I think it's pretty clear from the president's record. He's very different from the long line of American presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, from Franklin Roosevelt. I just think he believes national security is a distraction from his priority, namely changing our domestic economic system, and that's where he wants to spend his time and effort.
What does it mean when Mr. Gates writes that the president doesn't trust the military?
Well, this is, I think, a reflection of ideology, that the president seems to think that the military is pursuing an alternative course of conduct. If he were worried about that, he should not have retained Bob Gates. I mean, this is a lesson for decision makers down the road. If that's what you're worried about, he should have brought in a Democrat defense heavyweight, if he could have found one, to take up that job, so that he would have confidence that his Secretary of Defense was carrying out his wishes. Instead, as Gates's book reveals, you have the president, the vice president, looking at the military and literally saying, "I'm giving you an order," as if they couldn't figure it out.
He writes that he does admire the president, says he's smart, and some of his decisions and the way he thinks through things. But he also says that there's, quote, no room for discriminating analysis in the White House. Why, when you have policy and are formulating policy, that could be dangerous?
Well, I think it is, and I think it's a reflection in the Obama White House of the extent to which politics predominated. Now, let's be clear. Gates is essentially a career bureaucrat, so this book contains criticisms of the Bush administration, too. He says recent presidents have been too ready to reach for the gun in foreign affairs. Well, that certainly doesn't characterize Barack Obama, so he's criticizing implicitly George Bush. I think there's a lot more in this book that will reveal the basic tension between the career bureaucrat on the one hand and political leaders of both parties on the other.
So how do we solve this as the American people as we go forward for this nation in order to try to have some synergy when these decisions are made, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in office?
Well, I think you have to have serious political leadership, and I think that means a better understanding of American national security and a reduction in the amount of politics that was involved in it. I mean, this administration repeatedly, I think, has put politics above national security. They've put a lot of other things above national security, and I think that's a real problem going forward. I think it will be increasingly a problem over the next 3 years. You know, you look at Iraq, the president's advisors are all out saying his policy is a success when al-Qaeda's flag is now flying over Fallujah and Ramadi, where Iran is closer to nuclear weapons, where Afghanistan will likely fall to the Taliban when we withdraw. I think we're in a downward spiral, and I think it's going to be hard for the United States to cope with the challenges we're going to see in the next 3 years.
You've been in these meetings. You were a member, the high-level member of the Bush administration. How do you get politics out of this? I mean, do the polls really drive this, and how do we get back to a point where policy comes first?
Well, you know, I really don't remember discussions of politics entering in to key decisions except as an afterthought. And I think the ideal, the paradigm we should be looking for is Harry Truman during the Cold War, when North Korea invaded South Korea in June of 1950. Truman's advisors were worried about a defeat there and what it might do in the midterm elections, and Truman said, you figure out what the right strategy is, don't worry about the politics. That's the way to do it.
Is that what we need in this country, in the White House?
Well, it'd be nice to have a Truman style of leadership, somebody who understood national security, who dealt with threats to the United States and its friends and allies around the world, as opposed to somebody who sees the military as threatening and national security as a burden that gets in the way of his other priorities.
Also, what finally is kind of shocking about this is he writes to a friend that people have no idea how much he detests the job. One would think that if you hate it, you'd quit, but I think he may be writing about the pain and the guilt he has dealing with the sacrifice of our brave men and women in Iraq and Afghanistan. He wrote condolence letters at night. He asked his staff for photographs of the soldiers and the troops who were killed. What does that mean personally, and what type of toll does that take when you're at the top?
Well, I think it does take a toll, and I think it clearly did on Bob Gates. What's remarkable is it doesn't seem to have taken such a toll on the president, and I'm sure that disjunction between what Gates saw on a day-to-day basis at the Pentagon and what he experienced when he went to the White House must have been a source of real personal problem for him.
Ambassador John Bolton, as always, we thank you so much talking about this book that seems to kind of blow the lid off of what goes on behind the closed doors in both the Bush and the Obama White Houses. Thank you, Ambassador. Good to see you.
Thank you,
as
Eric.
always. Jamie?
Always great to have the ambassador with us. Well, Secretary